Hello and welcome back to my basement. This is Jeremiah Wolf, and whoa, 2 videos in one day. That's right. Today is Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. And I came across something really, really interesting last week or so, and I wanted to share this. Actually, this was just published a couple weeks ago. Let's, is this the right one? Yeah, there we go. So this was published in the journal Nature, and papers and patents are becoming less disruptive over time. I'm going to read a little bit from just the synopsis here, but if you just Google this link and you can download the full article and read it if you want to. I will admit that there's a lot of statistics in there, and I don't know statistics. I just don't. I'm a college dropout. It's one of those things. That's probably the only thing that I could really maybe benefit a little bit from in my career. Like if I actually went back to school, like that's really the only thing that I would get any benefit out of would be statistics. But it's never come up. In being in networking for over 20 years, I've never once needed any kind of in-depth statistics. But I might like to learn it at some point. Anyway, so this was really interesting. And it's really not too surprising, like if you sit down to think about it. But, we have lived in a world, you and I and our parents and our grandparents and even our great-grandparents, we've lived these past 4, 5, 6 generations in a world that has seen rapid and unending technological advancement, just crazy technological advancement. I mean, you think about just, my own mother, who is really, just of retirement age recently. Like she's, by a lot of standards, she's not old, retirement age. And just think about all the things that have happened just in her lifetime. It's crazy. It's crazy to think about how all the advancements that have happened. But when you also stop to think about it, you might begin to realize, there have been a lot of advancements, but there also really haven't. There's been, especially recently, a lot of refinements. And that's really what this paper kind of discovered, was that in reviewing millions of 3.9 million patents and 45 million papers across 60 years, they've found that the rate of disruption is decreasing, and we're having fewer and fewer breakthroughs. We're continuing to refine existing technologies, but there's fewer and fewer new technologies. It kind of brings to mind Star Wars. One of the things that are interesting, if you're a nerd like I am, who loves Star Wars, and if you've ever read the extended universe Star Wars, one of the things that writers in that sort of extended universe have struggled with is new technology. Because there's something in our brain that's like sci-fi always have to have some new technology, but at the same time, the Star Wars universe is like tens of thousands of years old. They've had the same technology for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. They've had all the same technology. It's just like there's been no advancement. There's nothing new. Droids and hyperdrive and all that stuff, lightsabers, all that stuff that's been around for thousands. We can't really fathom that, but it looks like that's where we might be headed. There's only so much we can do. I was talking with my wife the other day. She works in the power industry, and man, there's been some crazy stuff going on in the power industry. You see those substations being shot at? It's crazy. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff she deals with. And but what's fascinating is this whole movement toward electric vehicles. That's really exciting. And I see these YouTubers who have no concept of how science works, and they talk about, one day we're going to have the power to run your entire car for 1,000 miles. It'll be the size of a battery this big. No, it won't. In fact, I've seen some analyses, and really when it comes down to it, chemical energy storage, which is what our batteries are, chemical energy storage, really doesn't get much better than gasoline. Like, plain old gasoline is one of the most bang for your buck, excuse the expression, like energy dense forms of chemical energy storage. Like, you're never going to get much, if at all, better, and certainly not with a battery. So, like, absolute best case scenario would be you have a battery about the same size as a gas tank. But even then, you have to have all the additional materials and all the additional cooling and all the other circuitry and everything that goes into a battery. So it might be the best case scenario, twice as big as a gas tank. Like, that's absolute best case scenario in, sci-fi type technology that we haven't even imagined yet. That's the best case scenario. So, like, we're really reaching some hard limits. Like, there's some really cool battery tech coming, hopefully. And that's one of the other big things that's really been interesting is, like, there's been some interesting discoveries, but we simply cannot scale it. There's been some really cool breakthroughs that only work in a lab. You can't make them work at industrial scales, and they've been trying for decades, and it's just not working. So it's this really interesting time. Another thing that's really fascinating along this line, very related to our field, is 6G. 6G, if it can come out, because there's some real technical hurdles, is very likely, we'll see, very likely to be the last big breakthrough in wireless communications. Now, maybe something else will come along. But what's really interesting is, like, when I say that, there's something in our brains, because of the world we've grown up in, that says, no, that's impossible. We're not going to stop at 6G. There'll be 10G and 20G, and we'll be transmitting at, terabits a second and petabits a second. And it's like, no, like, there are hard limits to even with 6G. As I understand it, I'm not a radio engineer, but a lot of data, the way we transmit, we send out multiple signals, and the information is encoded in the differences between those signals. Well, with 6G, again, as I understand, I could be completely wrong about this, but as I understand with 6G, the wavelengths are so small that we're having trouble detecting the differences between the signals, so we have to encode the information directly onto the signal. Instead of being able to use math to figure out the information, we have to put it directly on the signal, and that's causing problems. And the signals are so high frequency, they just get absorbed by everything. So extremely low range and very high likelihood of distortion. It's just fascinating to me to think about. Now, there's been some big breakthroughs in wired transmission. We're still seeing faster and faster, optics and fiber optics and whatnot. But it looks like, even that's going to eventually, we're going to hit some hard limits. Like, physics has limits. The standard computer, classical computing, we seem to be really coming up, they keep finding little tweaks to keep classical computing growing, but we are not growing anywhere near as fast as we were. In fact, when you look at it, we've been able to increase processing power by adding cores. Like, we're not making bigger and bigger CPUs faster and faster. We're making more and more cores. And that has a limit, because software can only be, some things just have to be processed sequentially. Like, you can only break things down so much. So we seem to be hitting limits there. We seem to be hitting limits with RF transmissions. It's just fascinating that we may be entering a time where the world that you and I have known of never-ending technological advancement might start to slow down to a point where, our kids and our grandkids might live in a world that's beginning to stagnate technologically. I just think that's fascinating. I mean, that's the norm, right? Like, that is the normal. The normal is technological stagnation. The world went on for thousands of years with the same technology. Maybe every few hundred years, somebody would have a bright idea, and it might slowly disseminate through the cultures of the world. But by and large, things just never changed. You lived the same life as your parents and your grandparents and your great grandparents and your great great grandparents. You just lived the same life. We might very much be going back to that. So anyway, just real quick, reading from the article, and again, if you want to, just look up this title here. But the recent decades have witnessed exponential growth in the volume of new scientific technological knowledge, thereby creating conditions that should be ripe for major advances. Yet, contrary to this view, studies suggest that progress is slowing in several major fields. Here, we analyze these claims at scale across 6 decades, using data on 45 million papers and 3.9 million patents from 6 large-scale data sets. Subsequently, we think this decline in disruptiveness to a narrowing in the use of previous knowledge, allowing us to reconcile the patterns we observed with the shoulders of giants view, we find that the observed declines are unlikely to be driven by changes in the quality of published science, citation practices, or field-specific factors. Overall, our results suggest that slowing rates of disruption may reflect a fundamental shift in the nature of science and technology. That's just, it's so fascinating. And it's worth pointing out, I watched someone, the reason I know about this because I saw someone else talking about it, and she mentioned that she thought part of it might have been because there is a current trend among academics and researchers to cite old papers, like to try to find the oldest relevant paper to cite in your paper. It's kind of like I don't know. It's like the new TikTok challenge for academic science, but you know what I'm getting at. But anyway, so she said she thought that might be part of the problem. But here they actually specifically say that the citation practices are not part. They accounted for that. So this is just really interesting. I'm really curious to see what other people think. Maybe you think I'm an idiot, but I just think it's fascinating. Anyway, see you next time.